Hello and welcome to Personal Injury Today, where we talk about the hottest topics to help personal injury attorneys better understand their clients' cases and come to a fair settlement. Today, we're asking the question of how a permanent impairment is derived. We are here with Dr. Brad Poppie, and we will get right into it. On today's show, we're going to help shed some light on understanding how an impairment rating is determined, but more importantly, what pieces of information are left out of that impairment rating. Today, we have Dr. Brad Poppie. He is the founder of Injury Reporting Consultants, which helps attorneys just like you resolve personal injury cases through evidence-based medical analysis and reporting. Dr. Poppie, what are some of the components in determining permanent impairment?
Well, typically there's three, all right? And it's proper diagnosis, diagnostic tests, and functional limitations. But if you really look at, defining permanent impairment or permanency is a permanent damage or permanent loss of something, your foot, you lose a pinky finger, whatever, okay? So that's really what the definition is, but how it's determined is kind of an algorithm of steps. So let's kind of dive in and talk about the diagnosis, okay? The diagnosis must be made by a credentialed physician that diagnoses workers' comp injuries, personal injuries, that has experience doing it, okay? I don't want to say all doctors are not created equal, but some physicians, they don't have the knowledge base and the confidence to correctly diagnose certain musculoskeletal pathology, okay? So it has to be someone that really knows a very accurate diagnosis and can stand by that diagnosis, okay? So that's number one. Number two is diagnostic tests. And whether that means x-rays, MRIs, CT scans, things like that. And in my experience over the years, I've seen kind of horribly done films. They're not clear, they don't have the right angles, so it's very difficult for that physician to say, hey, based on these diagnostic tests and what's going on with the client, they have XYZ diagnosis. So the films have to be plain, very clear, very high quality, okay? And also read by a radiologist that, again, knows what they're doing. Are all radiologists created equal? Yes and no, okay? So, yes, all radiologists can read an x-ray and look at, the spine, for example, but most radiologists are going to look for catastrophic, life-threatening injuries. So let's say it's a lumbar, MRI or something like that. They may be looking for an aortic aneurysm where it's like, hey, is this patient dying? Well, yes, you need to look for that, but also what about the key components of determining impairment? Maybe they're not looking for the very small little ligamentous tear. Okay, that's a big deal, okay, especially for these types of cases. Or the disc herniation that has nerve root encroachment or something like that, okay? So making sure that, again, proper diagnosis by a qualified physician, proper radiology read from a qualified radiologist. So the third part is determining the functional limitations, and that's through the functional capacity evaluation, okay? The functional capacity evaluation confirms the diagnosis and quantifies the severity of it. Just because a client has ABC diagnosis, well, how does that really affect them? Well, if you took 10 people and they all have the same diagnosis, that diagnosis may not affect them. And others, it may be catastrophic. People are not textbook, they're individuals. So that's why we actually test that to quantify the severity of the diagnosis for that client.
And tell me, with the FCE, what is that process? How are you quantifying that?
So the FCE is a standardized test, and it's a very objectively reliable and valid test to determine someone's ability to return to the workplace, participate in leisure activities and/or activities of daily living, okay? It's been utilized in the workers' comp sector for decades, and now it's used heavily in the personal injury sector, okay? So it is the test, it's a 4-hour test where the client is taken through 20 functional tasks. Everything from lifting things, stacking things, doing squats, climbing stairs, ladders, fine motor control stuff. It's a full body assessment. So at the end of that test, that evaluator knows exactly how that diagnosis and those diagnostic tests that were positive for whatever pathology really come into play. And then you can have a really holistic approach to determining a true, permanency or permanent disability.
That's great. We're gonna dive in a little bit further, but I want to take a moment just to remind you all to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Click the bell notification so that you're updated every time we come out with new content. And again, share this with other attorneys as well as your clients so that they can get this information as well. Dr. Poppie, you've touched on this a little bit, but I want to ask you, is there a piece of information, we kind of want to get the insider scoop here to really help our attorneys watching. Is there a piece of information or a piece of the puzzle that doctors don't take into consideration when forming the impairment rating?
I think it's, I don't want to say laziness, but it's kind of lazy. So there's guides to impairments that physicians can just basically say, okay, here's a diagnosis, or here's the missing body part. They had an amputation at the elbow or whatever. And they go on a little, graph and table and say, okay, that's an X percentage impairment rating, okay, because of a loss of a limb or permanent damage of whatever structure. And like I said before, it's that can certainly give, the insurance company a number, but really what does that number mean? Because again, people are not textbook. They're not just a number, okay? They are an individual. And these permanency of impairment ratings really need to encompass all of those things to really get an accurate one. How is the diagnosis and the x-rays and the MRIs, et cetera, really, how does that parlay into really affecting their life, and what does that mean to that individual? So I think it's just taking kind of the shortcuts and not really looking at the whole picture, which is a much more believable permanent impairment rating, and it's more valid, and the insurance company understands it a little bit better.
So then what's the next step? So attorneys are watching this, they're getting some really great information. What is then that next step so that they can kind of sidestep or alleviate some of these issues that we're talking about today with the shortcuts? Yeah,
absolutely. Reach out to me, talk to me about your case. They may need some help on, say, who are the players, who needs to be on board here so that we can get a really good permanent impairment rating, a legitimate one. And we'll talk about the functional capacity evaluation. We'll talk about the radiology reads. We'll talk about, the proper diagnosis, and let's bring it all together and provide a, something of value.
Thank you, Dr. Poppie. Thank you for watching us today. And again, like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you next time.